This is not where we get the oyster shells, but it is in Puget Sound, and a lot of people haven't seen Puget Sound before, so I thought you'd like it. I better take these guys for a walk so I can show you how to paint Santa faces a little bit later. Thank you. Hello, this is Lisbeth Stull, and I'm going to be showing you today a little bit about oyster shells. Some of you have painted them with me and some of you haven't, but I want to give you a little bit of the background on the oyster shells before we get started. So I've put a regular piece of copy paper here. I'll put a bottle of paint here too to kind of give you a little bit of the size reference. These are Pacific Northwest oyster shells, so they're all from the Washington coast, and they are, I had no idea until I started doing this, that they are much bigger than the ones that are found other places in the country. Where we go to get them is, this is my very fancy map that I drew out so you could see some things. This is the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. I live right here in Tacoma, about 35 miles south of Seattle. When we go to the coast, we go south on I-5. This is the one that runs from Mexico to Canada. And we go down and then we take just a little highway that goes into Aberdeen, which is a logging town that is very, very depressed. So it's kind of sad to go through there now because the logging industry is slowed down. It's picking up a little bit, it's slowed down. And then at Aberdeen, you can decide whether or not you're going to go to one side or the other. And this is Gray's Harbor. A lot of the Quilcene oysters and some of them that are famous around here come from this Hood Canal area. This is Puget Sound, Whidbey Island, and then just Puget Sound. It's just a very rough sketch. But there's a lot of little waterways and things. And so a lot of the export and stuff has in the past come through Aberdeen. And this is Gray's Harbor. And everyone around here kind of knows what Gray's Harbor is. Gray's Harbor, you take a Y at Aberdeen, and you can either go to the Westport side, which is a fishing village, kind of, not village, it's a town, a fishing town, or you can go to the north side, which is Ocean Shores. Ocean Shores is more of a tourist destination. It's not like the carnival type that you would imagine you know, on a seashore type thing, but there is more of that. So a lot of families go there to vacation. When we get the oysters, one of the things that we notice is the oyster shells from Ocean Shores are much different than the oyster shells from Westport. And what I mean by this is an oyster shell from that south end, from that Westport side. And it's all very, very sturdy, not a lot of this chalky stuff that we sometimes see in oysters. But if you go to, sorry, this is going to be loud for a few minutes. If you go to, this is the biggest one we've ever found. This is as big as my paper, but you can see how there's some flaky stuff in here. And I don't know what causes that, but I do know that it's kind of risky to paint on it because it will, if you push on it, sometimes it will crumble off. So there is a difference between the oysters from one side and the other. It must be the time of year when they turn purple, more purple than other times. If you want to see how purple it's going to be when it's varnished, I just hit it with some water and you see how purple the back of that shell will become. And so that's kind of pretty, but you get to see kind of a preview of what your shell is going to look like. But this is a huge one. So that's the difference between the two, the north and the south type oysters. Definitely wouldn't want to eat this oyster. This is a big one. I'm thinking it would be as big as my hand. So those are the differences. Every oyster shell that I've found has always had a little doohickey, for lack of a better term. Do you see this kind of I don't know, it's almost like a shell in a shell in this oyster shell. And it's every single one of them on the one side or the other is going to have this, and this is where the animal attaches itself to its shell. So I don't worry about that because a lot of them are going to have humps and bumps, and it's just part of the surface that you're painting on. So you don't want to get too worked up over little things that are really just part of that shell. So that's where they attach. Now sometimes the oyster shells come and they are attached in a group. And what I mean by this is I didn't glue these together. So here's 1, 2, 3, I guess this is a 4th one. And this is all one piece. So you've got some surfaces to paint on. You can kind of see that they'll stand up in some different places. And if they don't stand the way you want, I have a collection of other shells and I'll just glue them or use quick wood to kind of place them so that they'll sit up pretty and straight the way I want them to. So it doesn't really matter if they're tumblers at this point, you can always fix those. But once in a while you'll find some that are just magnificent, and this is one of my favorites that I'm sorry to say I'm keeping, but it will stand up beautifully, and it stands up with this beautiful surface showing, and then on the flip side it shows with that surface. So I could set it this way, I can see a beach scene here and maybe a landscape on the back side, or I could set it up this way and maybe have something else. It's kind of leave it up to your imagination. One of the things too is we don't often find these, but in fact this is the biggest, nicest one that we've found. But the oysters all have 2 sides to them, and one is, I don't know what the real terms are for them, but one is the cup. See how it's got more of a, I don't know, it's a bowl shape, and the other is very flat. See how much different? And this I call the lid. This black piece up here is where the hinge is, where the hinge of the shell is. And this particular, a lot of times some of these get destroyed, and it kind of looks to me on this particular one, and it fits together perfectly, that this is where they stuck the oyster knife in to try and get it to come up and then got the animal out. So just interesting, and they're kind of cool surfaces to paint on because they warm up in your hand, and the paint dries really quickly, and it's just kind of a fun surface to work on. So I just seal them with multi-purpose sealer, just the DecoArt plain old multi-purpose sealer, and it will make the paint adhere to your surface real well, and I've never had any problems with it. So how I got started with all of this was my husband and I go to a seafood supply place, and he picked up some oyster shells, and because they have mountains of them, and I will post pictures in between this section and the painting section so that you can see the mountains of oyster shells. It becomes problematic almost because there's so many oyster shells in the area, because that's one of our big commerce things, and we ship a lot of oysters overseas and all over. So there's a lot of oysters coming in and out of Grays Harbor in that area. So there's these big, huge piles of oyster shells, and some of them get crushed for inclusion in soil and gardening. Some of them in the area even get crushed up to use in place of gravel. So there's a lot of different oyster shells. But Shane and I are at Brady's Oysters, and that's a fish market that is real well known in this area. It's one of the bigger ones, and we go there quite a lot. We like to go to the coast, and so if you've been on my webpage, you've seen pictures of my dogs, Maylee and Kai, that love to run on the beach and play. and we have a fifth wheel and we go over there quite a lot. So we were stopping for seafood, and my husband picks up these shells and he goes, you know, these kind of look like Santa's with that big beard, and there's kind of even a hat that looks like it comes over. Wouldn't that be a cool Santa? In my head, I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. No, it's not a good idea in my head. But the kind wife says, oh, good idea, wanting to encourage him. And I went home and I painted about 12 of them. Took them to a bazaar, a Christmas bazaar. And my mom had wanted to see them, but she says, I'll just see them at the bazaar. She said, what time does it open? And she got there about 30 minutes after opening and they were sold out. Yeah, shows you what I know. Nothing. And they've been a big thing, a big hit ever since. One of the places that they've been shipped to that I know of, and which, as I've learned since then, it's honestly illegal to ship these overseas because of the critters that could live in them. Ours do not have critters. I will tell you that in a minute. But these shells that I painted, some of them have gone as far as Belgium. The other ones, there's a lot that have gone to like the Cape Cod area. And people say, oh, it's just perfect for my friend or relative that lives up there and has a summer place. So that's kind of the background of our oysters. So now when we pick them, we go through and we look for a lot of them. You can see any size, any shape. There's some, again, here's a different one that's two all together. And this one's real creamy on the outside. It just depends on the time of the year and things too. It's got a little bit of golden retriever glitter stuck to it. But you can also see how this has got some flaky on here. Now that's not a game changer for me because I feel even if it kind of flakes off after I've painted it, it's just going to add to the charm of it. It's just a different, I don't know, it's just a different type of look, I guess a little bit of an aged type of thing. So that's what we look for. So when we get these oyster shells, we come back, we try and, when we're going to do it, we do it up big because it's messy and it's hard on your hands. It seems like it wouldn't be, but these little layers of shell are actually razor sharp. So when you're holding them and scrubbing them and you're using brushes and things, they get so that they make little cuts, and you can tell my hands are really dry already and I've just been handling them a little bit. How we treat them. So a lot of these shells, you can imagine, they get, if I'm picking this out of a big mountain of shells, there's a lot of little cracks and crevices in here. And these barnacles are actually animals. So you don't want them to stay in there if you're going to paint them because they're going to die. And when things die and hang around, they smell. So we don't want smelly shells. So we soak these in a bleach solution, and it's in usually a 5-gallon bucket outside. My husband, it was his idea, so he gets to live with the consequences of his great idea. And he soaks them, and then he rinses them out in the yard and then brings them in. And then I have a big kitchen sink that's, well, it's just a big kitchen sink with a big deep area. And he fills that with hot soapy water. We usually use Dawn. I don't think it matters what kind. We like the smell of that, and that's just what we have on hand. And then some more bleach. He puts on some rubber gloves, and he goes through, a ton of rubber gloves. I don't know how many, but he goes through a lot of them, and we've tried all different kinds. So we also go through a ton of brushes. So he'll have different sizes and shapes of brushes, and he will proceed to get all of this cleaned out. Now, when I say dirty, I mean dirty. I mean like packed in mud. Like sometimes he takes a screwdriver and he chisels out the mud because it's that thick and that bad. Sometimes, there's critters that eat dead things like maggots and stuff. oddly enough, spiders like to live in those big mounds of shells. So we want to make sure that they don't have any of those things and that they don't smell. So after Shane scrubs them and he takes tweezers and he picks out all the junk and he makes sure all of the barnacles don't have the little animals still living in them, he will then let them dry, and then we put them in the oven and we bake them. That way, to be extra special, careful, sure that we have gotten all the junk out of there, we want to make sure that when they heat up and they get totally dry, they come out, and then they go through the very scientific smell test, and that would be when I take them and I smell each one to make sure that there's nothing that we weren't counting on still being in there, living there, so that we can still paint them and feel like we're doing something that people can enjoy. Some of them will look like there's still dirt in there, but that's just permanent in there and it won't really come off. This one doesn't smell, but there might be some things that look like a little bit of junk in there, but they don't smell. So if they smell at that point, I put them in the yard or I put them in the garden. I don't throw them away, but they're pretty in the yard and they are natural, and I don't feel like I'm doing anything bad to the environment by doing that. So those are the shells themselves. Now let me show you some of the pieces that I've done on the shells. I'm going to get these shells out of my way a little bit. I'm going to take this away, get some of that crumbly stuff off. And I have several pattern packets that have designs on oyster shells. The most famous being probably, or the most popular, is always my Santa faces. This is the silver Santa, and I have a red Santa, just a very traditional Santa. I have a nautical Santa, which I don't have the shell, but I have. You can also do this just on a piece of wood. So this is the nautical Santa, and he's kind of got a real pretty coastal blue color to him, and then he's holding a net with some different shells and things. I had one lady in a class who took and put her son-in-law's favorite brand of beer. She put a little beer can in there because it was going to be for him, and so you can personalize the stuff stuck in those nets as well. So that's just one type. But then with this one, it was the first one that I thought, I glitter up everything else and I absolutely love it. So I'm gonna glitter up the back of this shell. So with liquid glass, I side loaded and I put on pearl cabochons and some of that mica glitter and just some other ones. I even took in some of the bigger barnacles, I don't know if you can see it on there, and put either a pearl or a Swarovski crystal in there so that you can see it's just something that people might not recognize first time looking at it. And then I even carried a little bit over to the front side of it. You can see down here there's Swarovski and pearl cabochons and that kind of thing. Now if I paint these as ornaments, say I paint something like this size for an ornament to hang on the tree, I use just a pearl bead, and there's always some little place that will fit just perfect. If it doesn't fit just perfect, I put a little rolled circle of quickwood on there to adhere the bead. Otherwise, I almost 90% of the time I use liquid glass. I like it because it dries shiny and pretty, and it's just fun to work with. Another one of my patterns is this one. This is a lighthouse, the lighthouse one. And this one doesn't quite sit up straight. So I'm going to need to put something on the back of it to make it so that it doesn't fall over and it's supported. So that's another one. And then this was one. This was the Seaside Getaway, I believe is what it's called. And it's just a cute little cottage on a lake or the ocean or something, and it's got all kinds of things. Now, the thing that you have to think about when you're doing this is there's going to be a difference between designing on a large shell and designing on a small shell. So I'm sorry to say, and I know that this panics a lot of people, but I use the painting F word, and that is freehand. I know that a lot of you don't like to freehand, but if you've got, depending on the shape of your shell, that's going to look a little bit different. But if you notice, the thing that's always the same is the horizon line. I can alter where I put that house or the path or the fence. I'm going to have more room for rocks on some shells than I do for others. And I can even play around with embellishing. I always paint things different the second time, and this one is one that I decided, well, I'm going to mess around with that and some quickwood. I don't have the starfish painted yet. There's some rocks and there's some shells. There's a sand dollar. And this shell is really interesting. I could put a lot of different things on it. But those quickwood embellishments are kind of fun to play around with too. So that's just an idea. The possibilities are really endless. And then this is another pattern. This is the lighthouse. So as you're doing these and you're thinking, oh, I can't do this, it's freehand, I can't do freehand, I want you to think about not saying I can't and saying I can't yet, because it is something that you can practice, and we're going to practice that in just a minute. So if you want to paint along, you're going to need out a flesh color and a shading color, and then a deeper shade, and maybe some white. So I'm using the warm beige, and then I'm also using, oh, it used to be shading flesh, but it's not anymore. Used to be flesh tone, it's not anymore. And then the burnt sienna. But if you've got a favorite flesh, a favorite shade, and then a deeper shade, that will be helpful, as well as some white. And it doesn't really matter if it's warm white or if it's snow white or titanium white. Either one will work just fine. But you'll need to have that. You'll need to have a liner brush, some sort of shading brush, and I think that's about it. Maybe a filbert. The last color that you're going to need is a little bit of Payne's Gray. So you can get those out. You can get a couple brushes out if you want to do it, or you could do it on a piece of paper along, or a little something small, and it doesn't really matter what size. I'm going to use this shell, and I'm going to show you how different it's going to be on a different size of shell, so that you can see the size and the placement and where I would put those things, taking into account all of those little, well, what if this and what if that's, okay? So get something to use, and meet me back here. Welcome back. I have all of my stuff ready, and I'm going to show you on this paper first what I'm going to do, so that you kind of get an idea of how I look at things and put things on, and then I'll demonstrate it on the shell itself. So first of all, I'm going to draw out just kind of a simple shape of an oyster, okay? The shell, not the oyster itself. Man, those things are not very attractive, poor things. But if you like them, then that's good. People ask all the time, hey, do you eat all these oysters? Oh no, my husband would. I eat a few of them. It's not that I dislike them, they're just not my favorite. I would much rather have Dungeness crab, thank you very much, or something along those lines. I like clams, but I'm not crazy about oysters. They're a little strong for me sometimes, even the mild ones they have when they're cooked. In case you don't know, sometimes if they're cooked well, they should be moist, and so they're kind of like wet scrambled eggs to me, and that's not my favorite texture either. So I don't eat a lot of oysters. So here's the shell, and I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to pretend that it is in thirds. So we're going to have kind of a pretend here and a pretend here And then I want to make sure that I know where my thirds are with the shell this way too, just to figure out where I want that all centered. Sometimes there's things that protrude a little bit more or a little bit less, but we want it to be kind of in the center. So as I'm looking at that, I want my oval for my face. This is how I start out. I want it to be towards the center, and I want it to be big enough, okay? I can always cover this with hat, cover it with beard, but it's very difficult while you're working with this to get more space should you need it. So it's always best to start out with an oval that is about a third towards the top third of the center, okay? So that's how I select the placement. The other thing that I'm going to come out with first is I want to decide about where the ball of the nose is going to be, and I'll put another oval. I like a little bit of flesh down here in case I decide to put a lip in later or something like that, okay? We're not going to worry about those little flanges on the nose. And then the first shade is going to be the brow bone down one side of the nose and the other brow bone down the other side of the nose. If you can help it, and then eventually we'll put on the little nose flanges, and then the eyes will go on either side, okay? So, but if you can help it, it's really helpful if you do not use a lot of pencil with this, because if it shows, you got to get rid of the pencil. And I want to make sure that I'm more concerned about the face itself than getting, covering up pencil lines. So that's why I'm saying that. So that's kind of where we're headed, all right? So again, you're going to find the thirds and look at them, and then you're going to put an oval in about the top of that center third. Now, I know I just said don't draw with pencil. You're going to be sorry. You've got to get those pencil lines up. Well, I'm going to show you, and so I'm going to draw with pencil. I've sealed these shells with multi-purpose sealer while you were gathering your things, and I'm looking at this shell and I see that I've got a third and a third probably, and then a third. I might, because I've got a smaller surface, I want to make sure that I have it in a place that's not going to make him look deformed, so I want to make sure that I can get his face on in a place where I can see it. Well, isn't that fancy? I go to use a pencil, and of course, with the video, it's out of lead. So, are you kidding me? No, this one isn't. I thought it was another one. So as you can see, the pencil doesn't always show up very well, but I'm just going to roughly go with an oval and then look back, see if there's anything that's going to get in my way. No, I kind of like that. I'm okay. I can tuck the hat up here, but I love to make a good beard, so I want to make sure that I've got space for the beard and stuff. So I've got just a little, yeah, that'll do. Now on the bigger one, it's a bigger space, so I have a much bigger place to put an oval. Oh, and I'm getting too narrow, so I've made a mess of this one, but that's okay. I just do until it looks about the way I want it to look, and then I can come back in the regular old eraser and erase up some of those extra lines. Now this shouldn't be something that you can see from the side of the road. You're looking at it with about 12 inches from your eyeballs to your surface, so a little thin, fine, pale line is okay. I like to base coat these with either a round or a filbert. I've got a round handy here, so I'm going to use that. And I'm going to go into my flesh tone and I'm just going to give that a good coat. Now, the first coat is not going to cover really well, and so you may need to give it 2, even 3 coats, but don't pack it on. Do a regular nice base coat, just like so. I don't have any glops. I don't have any big puddles. It's still sheer though. I know I'm going to have to come back. And then I will do the small one too. Okay. This one is a little bit deeper. You can see that I did this particular face has got a little more roundness to it, and it's bigger than what I need. But that's okay, because remember, I can always cover it up. And I think it's a little bit taller and a little bit narrower than this one is proportionately. But remember when I told you how quickly things dry? This is almost dry. It's not quite, but it's almost there. So when you hold it in your hands, it'll really dry quickly. So again, if we look at something like this, we're going to see where my oval was. We're going to see where that brow line goes into the side of the nose, and we see that original just little oval. Notice that the cheeks come down a little bit further, so that oval really was, you know, it's a fat oval. And so that's important when you're going to put your Santa face on the shell. So now this is ready for a second coat. Sometimes you'll get little pieces of shell, and I just scoop them up with my paintbrush so that they're not in the finish. But see, that second coat does do a nice job of covering, and we've got all of that. That'll be a great place to start. This one should be dry too. Just another quick coat of that paint. Now, if you're doing this on paper, it may take a little bit of time for it to dry. So if you are doing it on paper, you can be doing it on a little wood ornament to practice. If you have a shell already and you would like to do this, or maybe you've taken a class of mine and you didn't get it finished and you're watching this so that you can finish him up, now's a good time to hit pause and get this to the point where you can let it dry and you'll be ready to go for the next segment. Welcome back. I hope that you have a nice oval that has got a good solid coverage so that you can start your Santa face. So the first thing that I do is I grab a flat brush. You could use a 1/2 inch, you could use a 12 or a 10, any of those are fine. I learned to paint with the biggest brush you could possibly have, either a 3/4 or a 1/2, because then I have lots of water. I don't have to put a lot of paint on it. So that's what you'll see me use most, is the 1/2 and the 3/4. And I'm just going to shade across that where that forehead part is going to be. Nice soft. You might want to have a mop brush handy so that you can soften that out. This is a cha-cha. You could also use just a regular Maxine's mop. Anything like that will work. I'm going to do the forehead on that one. I'm also going to do, while I've got it out, the forehead on this one. I won't do everything on this, but I just want you to see how the different sizes are very doable. So I've got those two shells started. I've got my oval that is about 1/3 of the width of my shell, and then I've got it about at the top of the middle third of my shell as well. So just like we did on that drawing where we had the thirds, that is something that you need to keep in mind, and so you can see that now. Once you've got the top and the bottom shaded, don't worry about how much shadow you have at this point. We can take liberty with that later and refine it. Also, I've got some glitter in there. I like to put glitter on things, and isn't it funny how glitter sticks to everything? So when I do this nose part, that's going to be my next part. I'm going to just slide my brush over, and to about the center, I'm going to just come down. Now, if this is off a little bit, no worries. You can make it the center, right? You don't have to use absolutely all of this whole area. You don't have to use the whole amount. Maybe you don't want his nose looking like he has a very long nose. You might want a shorter nose, okay? So you've got that, and then I'm going to shade just a little bit across, very sheer, across the top of the bridge of the nose, because I want it to look like he's got a little turned up button nose, okay? I'm going to strengthen that up. Again, this makes my paint dry really quickly because my hand is holding it and my hands are warm. If your hands aren't warm, you're probably going to have a much easier time of it. So you'll also see me using my favorite mop brush, which is my middle finger generally. That's why it's always got paint on it. And then I'm also going to put just some little slides across the top because he's had a lot of years of smiling and bringing joy to all kinds of people. So again, on the smaller one, I'm going to take my shading color and I'm going to slide and go down towards the center. Now you're going to learn real quickly where those bumps are in this surface that are going to kind of hold you back. I've got a bump there that's not wanting me to do a pretty little shade down it. Oh, there it goes. And then I'm going to do the same thing and slide over here. Okay, that's not pretty, right? So take your clean edge of your brush and just make a little adjustment. No problem. You've got that all in your control. If your nose gets too narrow, you can always put a little more of your base coat flesh color. If it gets too broad, you can narrow it up with the shading color. So now I've got this little oval that I'm going to go around and do. And remember, this is just the very first part of it. This is just getting it roughly roughed in so that you don't have to have too much to worry about. Okay, so go ahead and mess with that for a minute and then we will get started on the rest. So you're going to want to slide that in the eye area on each side and then across the bridge of the nose. Okay. Welcome back. I hope that you are able to get your shading on there. The only thing that I did a little bit differently while we were apart was I took a little bit of shade down to the base of that nose too. But you can always do that a little bit later, or you can squeak that on now if you'd prefer. So now we're to a portion of this so that we can get some highlights on there. And you're going to need your same flat brush. If you want to switch to maybe an 8 or a 10, you definitely could. I'll switch to an 8 just to show you the difference. And when I'm highlighting, I'm going to use my base coat color and then just dirty brush into a little bit of the white that I selected. In my case, it's Snow White, but you could use, like I said before, a little bit of warm white or something else that you prefer. So I've got the base coat color along with my little highlight color, and I've blended it out on my palette. I'm going to get a little more, pick up a little bit of water. There we go. So now I'm ready to start highlighting. And when I highlight, I want to highlight in a C stroke at that nose. Just a little bit of a highlight. I want to go on the upper side of the brow and down the nose, but I don't want to lose that cute little shade that I have right behind the ball of the nose, because remember, I want to make him look like he's got a little turned up nose. If you lose that, you can always add that shade in again. That's no problem. And then I'm also going to slide some highlights across the forehead to kind of accentuate those little experience lines he's got up there. And if they're not perfect, don't worry about it, because they're not going to show that much anyway. And by the time you get hair and eyebrows and all of that stuff on there, it will be fine. I'm going to go down, just tap a little bit down the very center of the nose with the corner of my brush. Clean it up a little bit. Got a little bit of a highlight there. I'm going to pick up a little more paint in my same runway, not getting more paint really, but just a little bit more. And I'm going to slide and put some little cheek ball things in there. I want the balls of his cheeks to come fairly far up, because I want him to look like he's a smiling, jolly old fella, and I want him to not have a frown. So I'm going to make sure that I've got that cheek coming up a little ways. I might go back and change that. It just depends. Sometimes it'll work the very first time off. Sometimes I need to kind of adjust, and you'll be able to do that with this. It's kind of, I use it probably too much, but I say it's a dance when we're painting like this. We want to make sure that we've got, we go back and forth and we mess with it just a little bit here and a little bit there. And so here he goes. Okay, so I'm just putting in some little cheek areas. Doesn't look right yet. It's not going to look right yet. This is just kind of giving us the lay of the land and where things will go eventually. And he's starting to come about. Okay, but again, this isn't the end. This is just kind of the process. So if you need to see that again, I'm going to do it on this little guy. I'm again brush mixing a little bit of my base color with a tiny bit of white, whichever white you're using. I'm using the Snow White. And then I'm going to highlight the top of the nose, not too bright, across above the eyebrows, just a little bit. Oops, got somewhere I didn't want it. I'm going to clean that up with my little clean edge of my brush. There we go. And then I'm going to also do down one side of the bridge of the nose and the other side, and then just kind of tap in the center to make that where it shows most. And then a few little highlights for those experience lines. Now I'm not going to worry too much if I've got some little not perfect areas, because when I put on the eyebrows and things like that, again, things are going to go right into the place that they should. So no worries. This shouldn't be anything that's really stressful. Every single Santa is going to come out just a little bit different, and that's okay. So now I want to have this cheek. Again, I want those to come up quite a ways because I want him to look like he's almost squinting, because he is such a jolly fellow. He gets to bring such joy to all these different people in all different countries. And so that's what this is all about. Okay. So now you've got this kind of funny, I don't know, almost like a skeleton of what you need. I'm going to make those cheeks just a little bit brighter. Even up down the nose, across the forehead. Okay. I'm looking at this little guy. And I'm also going to take and just highlight a little more on his cheeks. That's not the final highlight. You're going to go back and forth a little bit. Okay. From now on, I'm going to use just the big one so that you can see that, and we're going to concentrate on this one. More of my highlight. Do the top part of the nose. Strengthen those cheeks just a smidgen. And then I'm going to leave little lines off to the side. So there's already a lot of shadow there. I'm just going to kind of put some smile lines there. They're not even showing up. So I'm going to get a little more paint, block it out, that dirty brush. There we go. And say, oh my goodness, that doesn't look right. No, it doesn't look right yet. You're right. You're right. A little bit more. So I've got a lot of this going back and forth business, right? I'm just kind of refining. I'm knowing that I can always come back and do more. And don't play too much like I have, because then you'll end up pulling it up like I did. At that point, I want to switch to a liner. You could use, I don't know, anywhere between a 5 or an 18-aught. I just pulled up an 18-aught, but you can use whatever you like. And I'm going to start with just the base coat color. So that base flesh color that you used. And I'm just going to tick off little tiny C's at the side. You don't want this to look like he's a raging bull. You want this just to be little tiny, like, suggestion of little flanges on his nose. And then you're going to just, with a little bit of your shade color, just touch in some at the bottom. When you're happy with that, brush mix a little bit of burnt sienna and your shading color, and you're just going to set down where those two meet on both sides, and it'll just give you that shadow of like where that little flange is meeting up with the nostril. You don't need a whole bunch of it, but just to kind of really make that dark. I'm noticing now that I've got a little bit of unevenness with these two eyes, the eye socket. So I'm going to go back with some washy shade color, and I'm going to pull this across there, just shaving off a little bit of that high cheek line that I'm not crazy about. Can clean it up over here, doing the same thing. Maybe strengthen with that shade color around those highlights to really give him that squinty Santa jolly face. Make sense? I notice I got a little carried away with my cheeks. So I'm going to go back in with my shade color if I need to. And I'm just going to shade around the nose and pop that cheek back so it doesn't look quite so much like it's sitting so forward. See how that made a lot of difference? But you know, it's kind of like when you buy new pillows for the living room and you end up, well, they don't go with the paint, and then you paint and then, oh, the carpet looks bad, and it's kind of a chain reaction here that I'm getting into. Because now I need to strengthen the highlights on my nose. But again, I'll be able to fix this up, you know, as I go. Once it dries, it kind of changes its mood. Okay, so that's where we're at so far. So let's give him some eyes. You can either use lamp black, or some people I know like to use the DecoArt Media Fluid. I'm going to use just some lamp black paint, but you can do whatever you prefer. I'm going to go back to that liner I was using, and I'm going to create a nice little inky consistency puddle of black paint with my liner brush. Just a little bit of water so that I don't have problems pulling these nice pretty little eyes. Now, when I look at the eyes, I want to make sure that I've got my pilot stroke, or the highest one, in about the same area on both. So I'm going to pull a stroke here, and I'm going to pull a stroke right there. Okay, they look like the sloth commercial. Coin slot. I love that commercial. So it's just a little line here. Sorry, that was a kind of a squirrel moment. And then I'm going to just pull towards the corner of his eye and towards the corner of his eye. These are just little indications of eyes. They're not fussy. They're kind of the Yvonne Creasel method, how she did them, and I like that real well because it looks like there's eyelashes on there, but they're not so pronounced that they look like he's got false eyelashes on. And then I'm going to come out a ways on the other side, so it really looks like he has this squinty, smiley face. Okay, so just long triangles. That have those little rough edges. That's all I do for those eyes. I'm going to make the centers a little bit darker. Now, on the small Santas, I'll put a highlight in here and call it good. And that's the way I will leave them. On the larger ones, I usually will take a little bit of Payne's Gray and white, and that makes the prettiest kind of blue color, light blue. And I go to kind of a medium blue, and I pull a stroke down on the outside and one on the inside, one on the outside and one on the inside. So now my Santa, you could use a green that you prefer, you could use whatever color you want. So now my Santa has a little bit of blue to his eyes. I'll dip into the white again and go just off to the side of that puddle I just made. Now I have a little highlight to really bring that blue color out. Just touch, but I want that other color blue to really show. Okay, so now he's got some little blue eyes. I'll wash out my brush again and then into just my white. And I'm just going to, at about 1 or 2 o'clock, put a little bit of a highlight, okay? While I've got this out, I can touch on the top of the flange, but I don't want this a dot. I want it kind of messy. I'm just going to touch down a little bit. I'm going to make a little arched line across the nose to kind of give it some more round. I can tap into the bridge of his nose and really get that brightened up. But I don't want it to be railroad expectable straight lines. I want it to kind of indicate that it's a face. I'm almost using my liner brush like it's a dry brush at this point. It's very dry. It doesn't have, it's not like a liner normally is. So now I'm going to put a little bit of highlight in this crease and that crease and that crease and that crease. Kind of just takes that I usually put it and then, okay, a little more in his nose. And then finally, when I've got it where I want it, I'm going to take and put it at the corner of his eye, on his cheek. I want him to look very happy and jolly. So now I want to also have a little bit of a highlight under the center of his eye onto his cheek. And again, I'm using this as a dry brush almost. I'm going to just kind of a messy little highlight that just makes him look ever so happy, and it draws your eye then to that. Okay, so I think I can leave him. I don't like how this one, the creases in that eye look, so I'm going to take that out a little bit. I don't want it quite so pronounced in there. And then I'll go back in with a little more white, but I want it to be a little more pointy. I want it to come together more with that other one. There we go. Okay. It's about where we want him. I like to use thin burgundy wine for my cheeks on my faces. And so you're going to need a little bit of a burgundy wine. Just a drop will be plenty, probably enough to do 10 of them if you had just a drop out. I'm grabbing a different flat brush. This one's a number 10. I could have grabbed my flat 1/2 inch, but I don't want to use my number 8 because I do want this to be walked out enough to where the cheeks look like they're, I want to have the color walk out, so I don't want that to be too small. Now, I know that I'm going to have some wasted space, but the red, the blush on his cheek is going to be up by the nose by the time I put that beard on and stuff. So I'm going to start on my chisel, and I'm just going to come around, not under his nose. I'm just going to draw that up a little bit, knowing that a lot of that is going to be gone. I'm walking it out real soft. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Walk that out. I want some of it up there too. Now you want to blush his nose just a smudgen. Just a very slight smudgen though, because there's a fine line between a happy jolly old elf and an elf who has been having too many Bloody Marys or Tom and Jerry's or whatever. We don't want him to look like he's too jolly, if you know what I mean. So we just want a little bit of a little blush to his nose because it's cold. And when this is dry, I'm going to continue to just play a little bit. And if you want more somewhere, you can. But that's where I'm going to leave him. And the last thing I'm going to do is I want to adjust his eyebrows, or where his brow line is going to be. So I'm going to brush mix just a little bit of my shade color plus burnt sienna, just to deepen it, just a smudgen, not a lot. A little more space, so I'm going to come up here and come around and really open up that eye area. I'll take a little step back from it, make sure that I've got it where I want it. I don't want that too dark. I want it really, really sheer so it's walked out well. If you need to adjust over here, you can. Just tighten that up a little bit. And that's where we've got him. You've got black and white out, and I prefer to use a grayscale for my beard and such. But I know a lot of people like to have a bottle of paint to do this, and I get that. So if you're Maxine Thomas calls them bottle babies. If you're a bottle baby, you are going to probably use something about like zinc. Okay, not much darker than that, but a pretty good gray. Just slide this over so you can see it. So I've got a pretty good gray going here. And I'm going to do my eyebrows first. So I've got a liner brush here. This is an 18-aught. I use Jasonia brushes, I really, really like them, and they put up with my abuse. They're not, you know, everybody's got their favorites, and that's fine. I'm not somebody who says you have to use my kind of brush. I want my eyebrows to start, I don't want them to go much further than that inside corner of my eye. So I'm going to just, with that brush that I loaded in that pretty gray and white, tipped it in white, I'm going to put on his eyebrows just with kind of a smudgy tap. That's official. That's an official word, smudgy tap. So smudgy, smudgy. I don't want it to look like he's got the Brow of the Month Club going on here and he has them absolutely perfectly manicured or manscaped or whatever you want to call it. I want it to be bushy, but not too bushy, because, you know, he's got an image to uphold here, right? So, do the same thing over here. Not a lot out from that corner, just a little bit. They say that you should have a line that goes kind of from the outside corner to to the nose and lines up. I don't know, whatever makes you happy, but that's kind of what I usually go for. Okay, so now he's got those cute little eyebrows on. You can always change them up a little bit and do whatever you need to with them after you've done a little bit more. I'm also noticing that my little highlight in his eyes kind of went dull when I put a little more highlight on, or a little more shade on there, so I'm going to spark those back up. And I noticed that I kind of lost the highlight over here too. I got carried away with that shadow. Okay. We're not done with the cheeks, so never fear. Okay, this is just where we're at for now. I'm washing out that brush. Now for the beards, you could use your favorite beard making brush, and usually it is a filbert rake of some sort. And my very favorite, they don't make anymore, of course, but there's a lot of them out there. And so my favorites are the old Athena, the Cheza's brand, when Cheza was doing bears. I love those, and I have 3 cherished Athena beard making, hair making brushes that I just love. You could use something like that if you have one of those in your stash. The other one that I've recently found is the Princeton Select, and it is the Filbert Grainer, and I really like these a lot. They put up with a lot of my malarkey. I don't like to wash brushes very often, and so I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch. You could use whatever you want. How I use these brushes is I get them super wet because I want them to have their, I want them to be hydrated, right? I get them wet. And I've still got some of that gray, so I'm going to just go into that deepest gray color that I had, and I'm going to muss that up a little bit. And when you load these, I bring them all the way straight up and down, and then kind of walk them out. So now I've got these little, it's like holding a little mitt full of liner brushes, right? So now I can begin to see how well my beard is going to hold on or be present on here. And I'm going to just add some little hairs. Not one of mine though, I took that off. Okay, and then just kind of walk up the cheeks. This will help me to get, I'm not putting on the beard necessarily, but it'll help me to get kind of the lay of the land of how I want this all to unfold. Okay, and at this point in time, I can look at it and I can say, oh, I need to bring that cheek color up a little bit more, or I need to adjust this or that. So this is a time to kind of look with a pretty critical eye at that, where you've got things, and see if you like them. Because once you start doing that beautiful beard, you're not going to want to go over it and take it off and see. So now's the time to look and see if it's straight. So I'm looking and I see that this side is coming up real nice and this side kind of hurt. So I need to fix that, don't I? That's better. So now I can see that he's becoming that jolly old elf that I want. And I'm not too worried if I've got some little flubs here and there, but I'm going to kind of wiggle my brush a little bit to kind of fill that in a little bit more. And it looks like I do need to have a little more blush to his cheeks, especially on this side. So I'm not going to go any further with the beard. That was just, you know, to get my stuff on there where I want it to be. I don't like what I've got going right here. There's kind of a little smudge, and it might not come off. It doesn't want to. That's okay. I'll cover it with my mustache. But I do want to get a little more blush on his cheeks, or on his one cheek. So I'm going to go over, it's okay if you go over the beard area, because you want that, if he was really blushing or had pink cheeks or pink face, it would be showing through his beard. Back in high school, I had a wonderful band director that he taught us so much, and we got to have a lot of really great experiences because we got to go to state, and we were very successful, and that was really great because he taught me a lot about a lot of things that weren't music related. And I'm just putting some of that color down there just so it's there. It probably won't even show. But he would get so angry with us and he was a redheaded man, and he had a beard, and when he'd get mad, his face would turn red, and his beard would just glow. You know, it would just, all that red would come shining through. I've got something here that I'm not sure what it is. It looks almost like it's blue. I might have picked up some blue, so I'm going to go and fix that. I don't know if you can even see it, but it looks like there's a little bit of blue in the white there, and I just want that to be gone. So I've got those little areas of his cheeks pretty bright, don't I? And that's okay, because when that dries, I'm going to show you a trick. Okay, so there you've got with his little cute face and his little bright eyes that are very, very bright. I'm going to take a real small round. I'm going to take a little bit of my original Flesh base coat color, and I'm going to make a wash. Not a heavy wash, not a real thin wash, but just a wash. And what I like to do with these highlights then, once I get them on there, is just with a little bit of that wash of the Flesh color, touch down on all these areas, and it leaves the highlight, but it makes it look like it's a shine on skin instead of just white on his cheeks. You can see the difference there. You see that? How this one has got more of a flesh tone to it. This one looks totally white. So we're just going to kind of soften that with a little bit of that wash of the Flesh color. I'll tip into just a little bit of my white. And then instead of having that whole area, I'm just going to give it ever so gently a little bit in the center-ish area. And it just gives it that much more definition. Okay? So there he is. Now you have the fun part. You get to do the beard, and you get to do the hat, and you get to do all of that fun stuff. With the beard, it is a gradual walk up in value. So you're going to start out with the darkest gray that we made, that was just a little bit of lamp black and white. Making a little more this time. I want it to be pretty runny. Not runny, but you know, you want it to be watered down enough. You'll know if it's not because your brush on your rake brush won't separate like it should. Okay, so I've got mine pretty. So now I can kind of put in my basics of my beard. Don't have enough paint if it's kind of, see how that's kind of beading up? That's okay, let it dry. And it's probably, not only do I have too much water in my brush, but because my hands are so dry, this is, I don't know if you notice the date on this, but if you're watching this after it first came out, I'm painting this and doing this video during the whole COVID-19 stuff. So I'm using a lot of hand sanitizer and a lot of soap and stuff. So I put lotion on my hands, and so it could be the lotion too from my hands. Even though I use a good brand and it soaks in, it could be that, and that's okay. It will eventually, once I put more layers on there, it will stick. The one thing though that I want you to do before you go any further on the beard, if I can find what I want here. I love these oval wash brushes from Jasonia, the Jasonia brand. They hold a ton of water. I like them to side load. They look like the old Possibilities brushes, but they're not. And they just hold a ton of water. So I'm going to take some of my Payne's Gray and just get a nice side load started with that. And before I go any further, I want to put some of that all the way around. And it's not going to show all this, you know how it looks really messy now? It's not going to show once I get all that I want on here. But that Payne's Gray shadow blends in with the shell, and it just helps to make it set into it rather than on top of it, if that makes sense. And so I'm going to just put some around. I know his hat's going to come up over that, but I want some of that up there. So this still has a lot of work to do. But I did want to show you how I do the face. You've done beards. You can do beards. Maybe I'll do another video on how to do the beard. But for now, we've got the face where we want it. It's ready for a beard. It's ready to go on to the next step. But that's how I do my faces. I hope that you had something that you could learn from all of this. And I hope that you enjoyed it. And until next time, this is Lisbeth Stahl, Cottage Caboodle. I hope you enjoy your painting day. Thank you.